Hello, everyone. I know a lot of you are going to be joining, so people will be dribbling in as I talk. This is just a very big welcome. We have loads of people signed up to this event, and I think it's testimony to the interest that there currently is in the topic of regenerative agriculture. My name is Tara Garnett. I'm the director of Table, and I'm looking forward to introducing our two speakers very shortly, but before doing so, I thought I'd just say a little bit about the two initiatives who are organising this event. The first is LEAP, which is the Livestock, Environment and People programme at the University of Oxford, and I'm part of that programme as well. It's a research programme which investigates the health, environmental, social and economic aspects of meat and dairy production and consumption, with a view to providing the evidence and the tools that are needed for decision makers to make good choices on sustainable and healthy diets. The other co-organiser is Table, and this is a new collaboration between the University of Oxford, the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, and Wageningen University, and it builds upon the work of its predecessor, the Food Climate Research Network, which some of you may know about. But what we want to do at Table is take things forward by digging deeply into the big debates that the food systems community is having about the desired future direction of the food system, and try and explore how and why people disagree, really what underpins these disagreements, and where possible, identifying areas of commonality. We also want to act as an inclusive platform for dialogue for all food systems stakeholders across sectors, disciplines, and geographies. And this is Table's first event, and as I said, it's focusing on regenerative agriculture. So our two speakers are experts in this area. So Professor Ken Giller is Professor of Plant Sciences at Wageningen University. He's worked for decades in sub-Saharan Africa, focusing on smallholder farming systems. And he was the lead author of a very recently published paper on regenerative agriculture. And my colleague Matthew is linking to that paper. It's open access as well in the chat box. Our second speaker is Yichao Rui, who is a soil scientist at the Rodale Institute, and he's also director of their farming systems trial, which is the oldest side-by-side comparison of organic and conventional agriculture in North America. And Yichao has experience spanning 3 continents. So what we're going to do with these two speakers is the next hour is going to take the form of a moderated dialogue. They're going to kick off by presenting their sort of a short opening thoughts, and then we're going to have a discussion. And in the spirit of what we're trying to do, we're going to try and look not just for where there are the disagreements and what lies beneath them, but also try and identify commonalities. The focus is going to be on the agronomic aspects of regenerative agriculture. And I can imagine that many people will be thinking, yes, but you can't disentangle this from the socio, the political, the economic, the ethical, and the other, those broad spectrum of issues that are ensnarled in this idea of transformation that regeneration embeds. But what we want to do is kind of get to the nitty-gritty of looking at things like soil health, things like soil carbon sequestration. And then we're planning a second event a little bit later down the line, and I'll say a bit more of that at the end, which is going to focus on these broader issues. So yeah, that's it for me for now, apart from some short housekeeping notes. The event's going to be recorded, and the recording will be available on our website. Throughout the event, because there's going to be a moderated, there's going to be questions from the audience at the end, please post your questions in the Q&A box. You'll see right at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat function, and you can chat and talk amongst yourselves through that. But if you want to have your questions heard, then please use the Q&A box. I'll try and remind you every now and then during the course of the event. So that's it. Yichao, over to you.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I hope everyone can see my screen. Well, thanks, Tara. Hello, everyone. Very excited to be here today. So some of you may know Rodale Institute already. Rodale Institute is widely recognized as the birthplace of organic agriculture in the United States. Also, one of the first organizations in the world to use the term regenerative agriculture. So today, I want to talk a little bit about the history of Rodale Institute and how we see the recent regenerative agriculture movement. Rodale Institute was founded in 1947 by J.I. Rodale, who was concerned about the increasing use of chemicals in agriculture and the declining public health. By publishing magazines and books and conducting research and education, Rodale Institute and the Rodale Press popularized the term organic in the United States and helped establish the National Organic Program and the USDA organic certification. And in the 1980s, Robert Rodale, J.I.'s son, started to use the term regenerative agriculture, by which he meant a type of agriculture that goes beyond organic or sustainable. So in his opinion, after decades of industrial chemical agriculture, our natural resources, including soil health, water quality, and biodiversity, all degraded, contributing to decline of human health and planetary health. So at that point, simply to sustain is not enough. We need to actively regenerate. Also, because the term organic became more strictly defined as certified operation processes, the term regenerative agriculture can point to a direction which focuses on the continuous improvement on top of organic agriculture. And very briefly, I'll give you an example of how we conduct research comparing different agriculture systems and in their environmental impact. So the farming systems trial started in 1981 is the longest field trial comparing organic and conventional agriculture systems in North America. And it's the European counterpart is the DOK trial in Switzerland. Many of you may know that. Initially, the farming systems trial had three systems: a conventional system, which represents a typical chemical-reliant corn and soybean systems of the United States, an organic legume system, which uses leguminous cover crop as a source of fertility, but receives no other external input, and an organic manure system, which receives both legume and manure inputs. And in 2008, all these three systems were split into both no-till and till, just to be relevant of the recent changes in the agriculture system around the world. And we found that since 1981, soil organic matter increased in organic systems, but remained largely stable or unchanged in the conventional system. And interestingly, we found that adding cover crops to some of the conventional plots increased soil organic matter in the conventional system. But adopting no-till or reducing tillage did not improve soil organic matter in the conventional system. However, adopting no-till increased soil organic matter in the organic systems. So these long-term results suggest that well-designed regenerative systems can sequester carbon and contribute to climate change mitigation. Of course, in the real world, regenerative agriculture alone cannot solve all the problem, but it is one of the most effective solutions that is also ready for large-scale implementation. So if we put all these agriculture systems on a spectrum, we'll find that conventional systems on the most degenerative side. So these oversimplified chemical-reliant systems focused on yields, but disrupted carbon and nutrient cycling and soil biology, leading to many environmental and health problems. If you adopt a no-till or cover cropping, you move a little bit toward the regenerative side. Once you transition to organic, And if you're able to manage organic systems successfully and further reduce tillage and improve perenniality or integrate livestock, you are further towards more regenerative. As such, we believe that regenerative agriculture is not a destination. Instead, it's a journey. So what is to be regenerated? We believe that on a small scale, it's the balanced carbon and nutrient cycling and soil biology. On a regional scale, it's biodiversity and watershed health. On a global scale, it's human health and stabilized climate. And of course, there are other aspects such as the social and political aspects of regenerative agriculture. And we welcome that more people to explore the possibility of regenerative agriculture. As part of this effort, Rodale Institute led to the establishment of Regenerative Organic Certification. The ROC is a holistic certification that includes soil health, animal welfare, and social fairness for farmers and workers. It was created to model an ecological and ethical system for agricultural production that addresses the problem of agricultural production, especially the factory farming and economic injustice, both locally and globally. Currently, our research are focused on 3 areas. Number 1, to design site-specific regenerative systems and refine regenerative practices to support farmers. For example, to offer more chemical-free weed control methods to add to farmers' toolbox. We know that agriculture is very site-specific and regenerative agriculture is knowledge-based. And number 2, to understand soil health and its climate change adaptation and mitigation potential, so we can better measure and quantify regenerative agriculture. And number 3, to understand the links between soil health and human health. So altogether, our DNA is both regenerative and organic. But as I mentioned earlier, we welcome any discussion on the definitions and implementations of regenerative agriculture. And we look forward to working with each of you around the world to unleash the power of regenerative agriculture to improve the health of the planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yichao. Ken, over to you, please.
Well, sure. And first of all, thanks very much, Yichao, for your very interesting presentation, the results you show there, and also for being open to discussing here today. I think it's great that we can do this. And it was a pleasure when we had to meet you last week when we had our introductory meeting. So I was introduced as an expert on regenerative agriculture. I think that's probably not correct because I'm still a bit confused about what it all entails. But maybe to give people a bit of an idea of my own background, I basically trained as an ecologist. I worked for years as a soil microbiologist, would you believe, soil science, and then moved more into plant production systems. But my work's been very much focused on the use of biological nitrogen fixation. And I think if we think about purely regenerative processes, then photosynthesis on the one hand and biological nitrogen fixation have got to be those 2 processes, if you like, at the basis of life, at the basis of agriculture. So I spent a lot of my career working on different types of legumes, agroforestry, green manures, grain legumes, forage legumes, and looking at nitrogen fixation and how can we bring those into our systems. Now, I wrote this paper together with some co-authors, and I think Jim Sandberg and Jens Andersen and maybe Renske are online today as well. And why did I write this paper on regenerative agriculture? Well, I was confused, basically. I saw suddenly this burst of interest in regenerative agriculture and many websites claiming things which it didn't really seem to be able to, which I don't think anybody could live up to. The enthusiasm seemed to be going way, way beyond the evidence. And I felt it was really taking attention away from some of the really important issues we should be working on. So when we went to then look, well, where does this concept come from, and started to dig back into history, we came back to the name of Dick Harwood, And I dug in my cupboard and I found this book more or less straight away. It's Resource Efficient Farming Methods for Tanzania. And it's a book from the Rodale Institute, together with other people. And Dick Harwood was actually the chair of the Tropical Soil Biology and Fertility Institute. And I was a member of that board and knew Dick very well, working together, looking at, if you like, opportunities for using the best of soil biology. It was very interesting to see that route of regenerative agriculture back there, mentioning many of the things that Yichao does, which go way beyond the plot to think about the broader system and the like. So in our analysis of what was being claimed and said about regenerative agriculture, I'd like to put forward around four different points. I mean, my first point really is that in the way it's being presented as a rule book for application everywhere, and I'm not saying Yichao does this, but it is generally being done so in the news, in the press. It takes little cognizance of starting points. And if we start with a very high soil organic matter, we can readily run it down. If we start with a very low soil organic matter, we can build it up. And what we need to do in different places differs enormously. And I work very much in Africa with smallholder farmers who are in this position, often with very poor soils, where it's hard to produce anything without some form of external inputs. We can't even get our legumes to grow without using phosphorus fertilizer. So for me, an absolutely organic approach really is not applicable everywhere. It can work for some people in some places, but not everywhere. The second point I'd like to make is that when we're talking about reducing inputs, I think we'll all agree that we want to reduce the amount of toxins, of toxic chemicals that we use as far as possible. But I think all agrochemicals get shoved under one banner, and fertilizers are not in their own. Nutrients are not toxic. Obviously, they can be misused, they can be there in excess quantity, but they're not damaging to human health, whereas pesticides are. And I think we need to disaggregate that. I think the third point is that if we're going to do without chemicals in agriculture, how do we actually then go about production? And, you know, some of the things, Yichao mentioned pest control, but there's very little attention in the regenerative agriculture discussion around integrated pest and disease management, around how we can actually do zero-till without herbicides, because zero-till systems tend to depend on herbicides. My fourth point is that the focus on biodiversity that's often given from on regenerative agriculture is very much looking at biodiversity on farm and not really out there in the broader world. And I think this idea of reducing yields in some places means potentially a broad ecological footprint or indirect land use change elsewhere. So we have to think much more broadly than single farms. And I think, Yichao, you did that in your talk, and compliments for that. But that's often ignored. And the idea of land sparing rather than sharing, I think both have their place. So basically, if you like, my entry into this discussion was very much around the point that really the enthusiasm had taken over from the evidence. There's a lot of dogmatic approaches of people saying, this is the rules, you have to appoint them everywhere. And that it was really taking away from the broader problems of how do we build a better food system which provides nutritious food for everybody on the planet. So that's really what brings me into these debates. Thanks, Tara.
Thank you very much, Ken, and both of you. So, I mean, I think we can move on to sort of the first topic, which is really what does distinguish regenerative agriculture, if anything, from other alternative practices and labels such as agroecology, indeed organic and so forth. But before doing that, I mean, I think just might be worth drawing out where there seems to be some alignment in between both your viewpoints. One is, I think, the idea that, you know, one size does not fit all. I think you're both very, very clear about that. And Ken's example of sub-Saharan Africa and the focus on mineral fertilizers there, which I think was implied in what you were saying, Yichao, that there is room for negotiation there. And the value of legumes, generally speaking, I think perhaps there are disagreements that we can explore a bit later on, which focuses on how we think about a particular practice within the landscape level and indeed at the consumption level as well. So perhaps we can move into this when we're talking about what, if anything, it makes RA different. And I think if you could bring into the conversation as well, I mean, one of the things you see and hear, and anyone who's watched the Kiss the Ground documentary or whatever, and reads the blogs about regenerative agriculture, livestock seem to feature very, very heavily. So I think it would be quite interesting to explore how and if livestock is fundamental to a definition of regenerative agriculture. Who would like to go first?
Well, I can go first. Thanks, Ken, for your opening speech. I'll address those questions later. But first of all, to your question, the definition of regenerative agriculture and its increasing popularity, Tara, I think different from sustainable agriculture and agroecology, the word regenerative is quite strong and is pointing to a positive direction. I think that's why it has so many people's attention right now. And the other reason why regenerative agriculture has become increasingly popular, I think, is because now we have realized that we've come to a point that we need to make some transformative changes to our agriculture and food systems. Agriculture has been overlooked for a long time. Agriculture now, we realized, is not just about producing food. It's directly related to many crises that we are in right now. For example, climate change, biodiversity loss, water quality decline, and a human health crisis. So there's a growing consensus that we simply cannot stay at the status quo. We need to make some change. And more people are realizing that we need transformative changes. So I guess that's why regenerative agriculture has become so popular. Of course, it has some, or many overlaps between with agroecology or sustainable agriculture.
Can I probe you a little bit more and ask you to talk a bit about the Rodale Regenerative Organic Certification Scheme, and how that is different from your ordinary organic?
Okay, so let's be clear. Regenerative agriculture is not strictly defined. It's broad definition, but organic certification in the United States is strict defined. And regenerative organic certification, the ROC, is strictly defined. So different from regenerative agriculture, the broad definition, the ROC itself is strictly defined. It has 3 pillars, including soil health, animal welfare, and social fairness. So it requires active soil health monitoring, so continuous improvement can be documented. And to be ROC certified, you have to be USDA organic certified first in the United States. But USDA organic certification does not restrict the use of tillage. But regenerative organic certification, the ROC, restricts the use of tillage. For example, the ROC has 3 standards, the bronze, silver, and gold standard. The gold standard of ROC allows only 1 tillage event in 3 years. So that's the difference between the ROC standard certification and overall regenerative agriculture concept.
Okay, thank you. Ken, how do you see the difference?
So one of the things we picked up when you start following some of these discussions and debates, there was a hashtag that I saw which really struck me, and it's a hashtag that says sustainability is for your parents. Yeah, and that suddenly made me feel very old, because I really do think that there still is value in the concept of sustainability. Yeah, But I mean, obviously,
and how would you distinguish that from regenerative then?
Well, you know, I don't really want to get into the business of saying regenerative should be this or that, but what I do recognize very much, and you know, I discuss a lot with a lot of the bigger companies. I've been talking to Nestle, to Unilever, particularly to Ben and Jerry's, whatever. It's the wish to go beyond sustainable intensification. It's a feeling maybe that sustainable intensification as a concept had become soured in some way, become greenwashed. But of course, now people are arguing that maybe regenerative agriculture is also becoming greenwash because it's being taken up by so many different people. So, I mean, I think that the wish to do good and the wish to do better, I mean, who could be against it? I mean, I think that wish is great, yeah? Going back to the question on the role of livestock, Tara, I think that there are some really important issues here. We've seen, in particular in some of the very specialized systems, and here in the Netherlands, we have specialized dairy farms, specialized or arable farms, and then the manure is actually sold, or in fact, it's the other way around. People pay for disposal of their manure to other farms because, of course, you've broken the loop. And the idea of integration of crops and livestock is very sensible. And of course, then there's a question of what level do you do that? Do you do it at the individual farm? Do you do it at adjacent farms? But in fact, in some systems, we're doing it now over hundreds of kilometers. You know, you've got manure going into a container, driving 100 kilometers to another farm. Seems to have gone a bit far, yeah? On the literature and around regenerative, of course, the practices of rotational grazing, but particularly the sort of holistic grazing come in. And I think that there are lots of questions to be asked there. I think that there's certainly value in rotational grazing systems. We know that. I think some, again, of the claims that livestock can regenerate systems on their own, I don't adhere to. I find it very hard to believe that evidence because livestock need to be fed on something. So if you're bringing the manure into a system, you've got a footprint on land elsewhere. And where many of the testimonies we hear on the internet are from farms on thousands of hectares. And of course, on that scale, then using livestock to improve areas of pasture and then resting them is all possible. So I think that there are always a gradation. I think everything works somewhere, but which of those things are generalizable, then that's really when the detailed agronomy has to come in, yeah?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think the scale differences in different farming systems is a really marked thing to take into account. I mean, I think two of the things, at least as far as I can see, that are talked about very, very in the same breath as regenerative agriculture is the idea of soil health. And then second, the idea of soil carbon sequestration. And I'd really like us to talk about both these things, but perhaps we could start with the concept of soil health. What do you mean by it? You mentioned it already, Yichao. What do you mean by it? And how is it different from, say, fertility, which also used to get used a lot? And so, yeah, your reflections on soil health as an idea or an outcome.
Thanks. Well, soil health, I think it has different definitions by different organizations. I think for me, soil health is that soil functions and produce food with minimized environmental footprint, but also can help farmers stay in the business, so meet their production goals. And specifically, I think soil biological health means that now we recognize the central role that soil biology plays in not just supporting plant nutrition, but also in maintaining active and balanced carbon and nutrient cycling. So soil biological health is achieved by efficient plant, microbe, and nutrient and soil interactions. And now we increasingly understand that efficient plant, microbe, and the soil interactions are key to soil carbon sequestration, nutrient provision, and soil microbial and abundance and biodiversity. And in my opinion, soil biological health is different from soil fertility. So you can have fertile soils, but very low biological health. So if you over-fertilize the soil and bypass the plant microbe and soil interactions, where plants are disconnected from soil microbes or rely on synthetic inputs, then soil is not biologically active or healthy. Even the soil is fertile, but over time, in that case, over time, soil fertility will decline under such practices.
Ken, I have a feeling you don't like the idea of soil health.
Soil, I've always found, to be honest, that the terms which came on board over the past couple of decades, soil quality, soil health, I found them very nebulous, very, very difficult to define. And what I like about a definition of soil fertility is the simple one I use is the capacity to support plant growth and productivity. And of course, what Yichao was saying is absolutely correct in that we have glasshouses here in the Netherlands which grow fantastic crops of tomatoes on rock wool and nutrient solutions. So, you know, potentially we don't need soil, you could argue, but of course we do outside. And I mean, I don't want to argue against soil biology. It's such a fantastic subject. It's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, I spent years looking at rhizobia bacteria and their survival in soil, and it's just wonderful. But at the same time, I feel that at times the topic of soil microbiology is being given sort of mythical properties almost. I mean, FAO now have 12 children books on the magical properties of soil biology. Very nice, but it's going a bit far. There are a lot of people saying we have to switch to a fungally dominated biomass in agriculture, in the soil, and to mimic what you have in natural systems under forests and grasslands. That makes no sense to me, because soils under agriculture are doing different things than they do under forests. We want them to do different things. And so I think that there are many examples there that we have to be a bit careful about getting too carried away with our imagination, while at the same time we know that many of the soil organisms have very important functions in a soil of creating porosity, giving drainage, recycling nutrients, etc. Yeah. So personally, I don't find soil health a particularly useful concept, but it's one which has gained a lot of ground, and I think people can relate to it in the same way they do to human health. You know, it's a positive attribute. Yeah.
Yichao, would you like to sort of come back on any of that or reflect upon it?
Yeah, I agree. I think soil fertility or soil quality are more neutral or more agronomic, but the term soil health certainly has other aspects. For example, the social aspect that we just talked about, which is similar, the situation with the term regenerative agriculture, which is different from sustainable agriculture or agroecology. So I think I agree that with Ken that some claims to switching our soil community to fungal dominant might not be the best or the most appropriate, because I believe that the balanced ratio or balanced community between fungal community and bacterial community is the best, but it varies from
Sure.
Case to
so
case.
Maybe I could come back on this as well, because I think if we want to steer the soil microflora, the soil biology, we do that through inputs. Yeah, we don't do it by inoculation, we don't do it by selection of bacteria and light. We do it by either adding more decomposable material or less decomposable material, and that then naturally selects and develops different types of populations. So to be able to manage the soil microflora, in a sense, we manage crop growth through the way we use organic manures. And I see in my lectures and the way that I've looked and worked on this, and we had a book about this in the 90s, looking at how we manage different litter qualities from plants, that you basically manage mineralization or immobilization of nitrogen, so the availability through the quality of the organic matter you're adding. And in a sense, that then selects for the bacteria and the fungi and the things which do a good job with it. Yeah. So I think maintaining a healthy input of organic matter into soil is key, and then the bugs will look after themselves. That's sort of my maybe rather simplistic understanding of things. Yeah.
Yeah, as a soil scientist, I completely agree with that.
Well, we've reached a bit of agreement there. I mean, I think one of the areas, and I want to move on now, where there may be less agreement, or certainly a lot of claims and counterclaims, is the role of regenerative agriculture in helping draw down carbon from the atmosphere, the issue of soil carbon sequestration. And as people will know, that, you know, some of these claims have been that regenerative agriculture can actually reverse climate change. Now, I think we really need to talk about this. Who would like to go first?
Maybe if I do first, because Yichao has been going first today. I think we have to recognize that also among the soil science community, there are differences of opinion. We have authors of the IPCC who attach great value to soil carbon sequestration. I think we all actually attach value to carbon sequestration. It's really a matter of how much carbon can we store. And I think the graphs that Yichao showed were actually very telling, because you show very much a raise of soil carbon up to a new equilibrium. So you change your inputs, you come to a new equilibrium. And I think this point, which it's been well drawn out in the literature, that you can start by building carbon steady on a steep slope, but then it'll attenuate, the rate will attenuate to a new equilibrium. And I think that some of the earlier claims which were made were really based on that initial rate of sequestration, without taking into account that rate will slow as the soil becomes, if you like, towards its saturation potential. Now, the actual amounts of carbon that soils can store globally, then there is huge disagreement on that in the scientific literature. And I must admit that my reading of it tends to be on the rather conservative side in terms of the amounts. I don't think we should underplay that we should try and look at building soil carbon where it's possible, particularly in degraded soils. You've got the greatest potential to build soil carbon. But I do think if we put all our eggs in one basket and we forget the other things like stopping emissions, renewable energy and everything, then we do the world a disservice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yichao, I mean, perhaps you could come on to the extent to which you're feeling also that regenerative agriculture can sometimes be seen as a get out of jail free card, so we can carry on flying and driving and all the rest of it because the soils are going to save us. I mean, that's certainly not the intention of the Rodale Institute, but yeah, I mean, do you tend towards the more optimistic end of the estimates?
Sure, we are very optimistic about the potential of regenerative agriculture and soil to sequester carbon and mitigate climate change. And of course, it cannot solve all of our problems, but it is one of the most critical issues of current society that we have to address. And we believe that climate change mitigation potential of regenerative agriculture is significant. That's because although the carbon sequestration potential is very context dependent and site specific, as Ken just mentioned, but overall, the global cropping soils are heavily degraded. So about 1/3 to half of the global cropping soils lost about 50% of carbon. Some estimates 30% to 50% carbon. So that means there is a potential to sequester carbon back into the soil and mitigate climate change. And of course, the effects will vary from environment to environment, but we can design site-specific regenerative agriculture practices. And I agree that the actual numbers of carbon sequestration around the world might vary, but I think the goal for regenerative agriculture movement is to inspire all the people around the world to be part of this movement to address one of the most important issues.
I mean, Ken, perhaps you could
Sure.
comment on that with specific reference to the kind of broader systems level,
Yeah, no,
the
exactly.
extent to which you can sequester on farm, but you're robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Sure. So, I mean, that's going through my mind. And, you know, nobody wants to discourage people from doing good things, yeah? And in a sense, Yichao, I hear you. I mean, you're the optimist, but does that make me the pessimist? I don't want to be a pessimist. I want to be positive. And I think that we can do better. There's no question about that. I do think there is also scientists at times that can be unhelpful because we come up with these statements, also scientists, the food system's broken, all soils are degraded. And they're not true. And they're true for some things in some places. There was a report recently in the Netherlands, which was called, in Dutch, the bodem bereikt, and that means we've reached the bottom, but bottom also means soil in Dutch. Bodem means soil, it means bottom. And it was really saying, soils is a huge crisis. I don't believe it's true. I think Dutch soils, in the end, are maybe doing a bit too well, and they've got too much organic matter going into them already, yeah? So again, for me, it's starting points. I think the point is yeah.
Sorry, you broke up, Ken.
Manure. Oh, sorry.
It was your next point, your new point.
Okay. Yeah, it's telling me I'm unstable, but so I can't really do much about that. If you're going to use compost manure, that manure comes from somewhere. So it comes from grazing animals on a larger area of land, or it comes from biomass from other pieces of land. So that actually footprint of the production on bringing in other new. It's not true necessarily of legumes if they're in place and they're fixing nitrogen, but of course you can't then a lot of comparisons which are done purely on a plot by plot basis don't take into account the rotational benefits and the broader ecological footprint of the systems that they're part of. And I thought your point, Yichao, when you said that we need to look at these things at the local system, the farm, the regional, and to look at that nesting of systems was a really important one in this context. Yeah.
How do you feel about this? I mean, this sort of systemic.
Sure, I think that's absolutely true, and we need to look at things more systemically and more holistically. For example, in the United States, in one place, farms may be doing well, for example, in Iowa farms, but they have consequences elsewhere. For example, the synthetic fertilizers will be lost in the waterways in Iowa and cause problems in the Gulf of Mexico. So these issues are holistic, and we have to address them systematically. And I think what regenerative agriculture offers opportunity is that now we need to recognize that, and we need to recognize we are not doing good enough. We need to put more effort. How much research money went to organic methods of controlling weeds? Not very much, very few. Can we do better? Yes. How much effort has been dedicated to bridging the rural and urban and rural nutrient gap? Not much. We need to do better job. For example, I hear a lot of people saying that applying compost is good to sequester carbon, to replace synthetic input, but there's not enough compost around the world for the farms. A lot of people saying that, but don't forget, 40% of the global food is being wasted and going to landfill every year.
Yeah.
And in Pennsylvania here, our local municipalities produce compost from leaves, from other green wastes. And usually these composts are free to pick up, but a lot of time they're just sitting there. So for sure, there's a lot of things we need to do to close the urban and the rural nutrient gap. And certainly they have benefits.
Yeah, it's a really good point, I think, absolutely.
Different kinds of system effects. I mean, I think this is actually a really good opportunity to move into the questions, because some of the questions I was about to have other people have already asked in a much more articulate way, and they tend to be about trade-offs in terms of inputs and in terms of land. So this is one, the sort of top voted, there's a voting system, top voted question is that supplies of organic legumes and organic manure need to be produced on land which is taken away from food production. Do you factor this loss of land from food production into your yield data from regenerative organic systems? So that's obviously one for Yichao. Perhaps you could, if you could address that.
Well, I think we can do a better job in integrating, cash crops and the cover crops. And of course, it will be site specific again, right? For example, here in Pennsylvania or in the Eastern United States, we have good windows of putting cover crops. But in Minnesota or some northern states, they have very short window of opportunity to putting a winter cover crop. So these things we need to stress, and we need to dedicate resources to do more research, how to, breed or, find cover crops that are adapted to the northern regions and can overwinter and still produce agronomic benefits, health benefits. So these are the research we need to do. But I think regenerative agriculture opens opportunity and also addresses the importance for more research to be done.
So, but at the moment, your yield data doesn't take into account these additional external land uses and inputs.
Well, our long-term farming systems trial showed that after 40 years management, the organic system, especially the organic manure system, can produce similar amount of yield compared to the chemical reliant conventional system.
So if I could jump in, Yichao, I mean, I think the question is, where's that compost coming from, isn't it? And you made the point yourself that it's not a limitless resource, so that depends on a bit of land elsewhere. So I think the question in a sense is, how do we incorporate that footprint, that extra land, into our estimates of yield response, yeah? For me, just to give you an example, it takes me back because we used to do all this work on agroforestry where we looked at alley cropping, and we had trees and we had alleys with crops, and people measured the yield in the alley, and they didn't take into account the area that the trees were under, which was taking a 25% out of the plots. It's that sort of argument, yeah?
Yeah, that's a good point. Our organic manure system actually mimics a local dairy manure production. For example, we produce not just corn and soybean, but also hay, alfalfa, and corn silage to feed the dairy cows. And the manure produced by dairy cows will go back to the soil. Yeah. So that's a closed loop.
I mean, I really do believe that this area, if we're talking about things for the future, maybe something to keep for the end of the discussion is having whole farm systems experimentation, where we really look at integrated farm systems, is really where we've missed out in the past. And we haven't done enough of that to take all of these account of all of these potential trade-offs and things.
I mean, I think there was another question in very, very similar vein, which is that, if regenerative agriculture has lower yields, when it comes to overall landing requirements, taking into account all these additional variables, then the question is, may sparing, increasing agricultural yields, reducing farmland area, and actively restoring natural habitats be a better option for carbon sequestration? I mean, it's that age-old question. Any thoughts on that?
I want to address that question because I have responded to that question many times. So if you do literature or global meta-analysis of conventional and organic systems, you will find that on average, organic systems yield less than the conventional system. That's true. But those studies or those research sites or different studies, the organic systems are managed differently. And sometimes they're not the best, management. So, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep trying to find better ways to improve the yield. For example, in an organic system, we can have better ways to control the weeds, which can help, produce more yields. This is the case we found in our, long-term trial. In the first few years, you saw a yield decline of the organic system after transition to organic. But over time, the organic system tend to be, they will yield more or yield similar, and they will be more weed resistant. And don't forget that conventional systems always use a lot of fertilizers and pesticides. I speak to farmers here, I listen to podcasts of farmers. Their suggestion to, for example, to spring herbicide application is always to spread more than recommended. And don't forget that more than 50% of the synthetic fertilizer you apply will go to waterways or the air. So I guess that's the reason we need to keep trying to find better ways and do more research to refine the organic systems and to close the yield gap. And I believe that's possible.
I think we've got to be a bit careful in that, organic systems can be very leaky as well. Yeah, I think particularly where we have livestock involved. Also with legumes, legume residues are very carbon nitrogen rich. They decompose very fast. They can be real sources under moist conditions of denitrification losses, not losses of nitrous oxide to the atmosphere. So, I think we have to get away from the idea that organic systems aren't leaky, because I think inherently, we have to put organic manures on at the beginning of the system, whereas with fertilizers, potentially you can top dress. Now, I don't want to disagree, though, on the point that, I've been in the Midwest. I've seen some of the practice there. I remember talking to a farmer about, applying his fertilizer, and he said, yeah, we just fly it on, anhydrous ammonia. We just fly it on from a plane. You think, how on earth can that be good practice? So I'm not trying to defend lots of bad practices. We can do much better with the efficiency of nitrogen being used. But I think we have to accept that organic systems can also be leaky, I think one of the issues for me always is that agronomy is really a place-based practice, a place-based science. You have to adapt practices to the local condition. And I think all of us can come up with an example and say, yeah, but this works. Well, it does. It always works somewhere in some place. But do you then want to extrapolate that everywhere? And how do we, get away, if you like, from those sort of blanket approaches to thinking in a much more nuanced way about, where is organic the best way, for which markets, in which situations, where do we actually need, for bulk production of some things, maybe we need some of those big farms in places people don't want to live, which aren't particularly good for nature. And thinking on a much broader scale about the food system and how we integrate things.
I think that's a good opener into a question that we've also had, which is it's about farmer perspectives. So the question is specifically, what about the indigenous farmer cultivator perspective on regenerative agriculture and land use? Are conversations being had with indigenous farmers? I know you've both of you worked in many, many different parts of the world, and there'll be many, many different perspectives there. So what do farmers want? And what do they think? Impossible to generalize in that way, but the sorts of conversations you've been having.
I can honestly say I've never had a discussion specifically with a farmer about regenerative agriculture. Yeah?
not specifically regenerative agriculture, but with those sorts of practices?
No, I mean, very often and you can argue, why, when we show up in places in Africa where we're working, you say, right, okay, what are your first needs? Well, it's very often, good water supply and health care. Well, that's not something that we as agronomists can address. But then it's very often, if we're getting into the production side, we need inputs, we want fertilizers, and we need access to them at a price that we can afford. And so, again, I think, it depends, but it would really depend on where you are and who you're asking, as to what the response would be. It won't be one thing, and even within one village, there'll be different people asking for different approaches, of course, as well.
Well, I think certainly Ken has more experience than I do working with farmers, but I think farmers, they know what to do. Farmers know how to farm more sustainably or regeneratively. They just need support from the society, from government policy, from researchers. For example, I talked to a farmer here near Rodale Institute. He's a farmer, about 60 years old, farms 5,000 acres. And he told me he tried organic. He tried organic in a small acreage, but he said it's too hard. So he gave up. So that's not uncommon. I think they need support from researchers to provide more options to their toolbox. For example, the chemical-free weed control methods. They need that, knowledge. And also they need other policies, for example, crop insurance policies, which are now largely focused on conventional corn and soybean subsidies, right? So they need that, change to support them. And regenerative agriculture, I think it actually offers opportunity to recognize farmers' job is important. They are not just producing food. What they're doing is really related to other issues of a society. So we need to support them. There's no doubt with that.
Sure. Maybe if I could just add one other thing, and that is that, I think farmers are often being accused, if you like, of degrading soils, degrading land. And I see a very clear link between poverty and soil degradation in Africa. It's very often poorer farmers, if you like, often on steep slopes, without the resources, if you like, to manage that land properly, but where erosion is caused, where soils degrade because there are no inputs going in, and yet farmers are still trying to get crops out of it. And so I think that the idea of soils, protecting soils, of course, or in making sure that our soils are there for the sustainability of future generations is a key point. But we also, under those situations, how can farmers be supported, if you like, or have the opportunity to invest in their soils when their back's against the wall in terms of inputs? And if we're really moving forward, there was a comment saying there are countries, I was trying to watch the chat a bit, there are countries where there's plenty of land. Now here, if we did an analysis recently, the area under agriculture in Europe has declined very significantly since the early 60s. Yeah, so we're using less land, much more has been put back into nature. If we look at where populations are really going to explode in the next years, I mean, the population in Africa is going up very, very steeply. And you're getting more and more pressure on land. You're getting much people actually expanding into areas of land which we would think are really of lower potential, so drier areas. That's putting a huge pressure then on wildlife areas. And working with organizations like TNC and WWF, they're really concerned that the population expansion into low productive agriculture is really going to squeeze out a lot of the wildlife. Now, I mean, under those situations, I really think that we definitely need an investment, if you like, in productivity to actually try and boost production. Now, whether or not we need to put a regenerative label on that, and maybe I'm going off track a bit here, but I hate to go away from the idea to say, oh yeah, but there's plenty of land in the world anyway. So I think it really depends on where you are and what those pressures are as to whether there is sufficient land for the production systems that we want. Sorry, I'm going on a bit.
I want to add to the question about corporate capture and greenwashing of regenerative agriculture. So to better support farmers, I think we really need to recognize their work, value their work. So to the question of greenwashing of regenerative agriculture, we are concerned. We are concerned about greenwashing, although we think regenerative agriculture, the term is broad, but there are some big companies, well, here in the United States, there are some big companies, they started picking up the word regenerative agriculture as marketing tools, but actually not doing anything or making any positive changes. That's not good. That's why we led the establishment of the regenerative organic certification, which I believe is a way forward to recognize the work of regenerative organic farmers. It's not perfect, but it's just the beginning. It will evolve over time.
So there is actually a question somewhere that makes the point that if I can't find it again, but if it was more or less trying to say that if regenerative agriculture recognizes the idea that one size does not fit all, how does a certification system, which tends to close things down, how does it square that circle?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Well, the question was, and I wish I could find it now, but it was essentially trying to say that this context specificity of challenges that you've both really emphasized, and yet a certification scheme is about applying doctrine, as it were. So how do you square that circle?
Sure. Well, agriculture, systems are very, site specific, and that's why in the regenerative organic certification, we have a system that actively, documents the change of soil health. We have several soil health indicators that we require the, farmers under the regenerative organic certification to measure every year, every 3 years, so they can maintain their soil health status. And of course, soil here cannot be compared with soil other places, but they can compare with themselves over time.
I see, okay. I'm aware that we have well over 50 questions, and we're certainly not going to get through more than maybe one or two more. Hopefully I could perhaps prevail on you both to answer a few of them outside this webinar. That would be really, really helpful, and we can post them up on the table website. But there is a question which the whole land constraints issue. I mean, one argued way of getting two for the price of one on land is agroforestry. And so there's a question here that says, it's specifically addressed to Ken. You mentioned what you've done on agroforestry systems. What do you see as the role of agroforestry in regenerative agriculture in European temperate context? But I think you can both answer this one.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a lot of interest at the moment in agroforestry in Europe in particular. And we have done a lot of work on agroforestry in developing countries. I've worked in Asia, in Latin America, and Africa on agroforestry. And, most small farms are agroforests. They integrate trees and crops in different ways, for fruits, for fodder, for different products, for wood, and also for soil fertility at times. In Europe, there's a lot of interest at the moment. There's particularly people see the advent of robotics, of small tractors which can move easily between rows as being one opportunity for agroforestry to be incorporated. My own feeling is that, in the end, farmers don't like trees in their fields because they bump into them with the tractor. That's one of the reasons that we've got rid of trees from fields. It's I think huge fields are horrid. I love hedges. You know, I think getting more hedges into our system can give many different ecosystem functions in addition to sort of bringing in nesting places for birds that can control insects. It can bring in habitat for biological control agents, if you like, among the insect population. So getting more hedges in our landscape would be wonderful. I think that the idea of strip cropping with trees, which is being tried out, will probably never take on. Yeah. And one of the reasons is that we have these different principles, you know, zero-till, agroforestry, etc. Zero-till with trees is disastrous for cropping because the tree roots tend to go through the topsoil and really compete with the crop. And so often having tillage with trees is needed. Yeah. So I think sometimes we have to look at the opportunities for integrating these different types of practices, because they're not always 100% compatible.
Did you agree, Yichao? And
well, I actually want to address this question of agroforestry to go together with the question of the benefits of livestock, which I haven't had a chance to address earlier. Mm-hmm. So first of all, I think they are a very good example of showing that regenerative agriculture should be site-specific. So for livestock, now there's been a lot of research showing that integrating livestock can bring some beneficial outcomes, including improving soil organic matter, stimulating microbiology, and other benefits. So this is definitely a area worth more research. But the effects of including livestock will be context dependent. And especially in the regenerative organic certification, livestock should be pasture raised, not raised in a confined environment. And I mean, what I'm saying about the site-specific feature of livestock is that, for example, here in the United States, we know the Midwest or the middle of the United States are formed, you know, the soils formed under the prairie grass, the tall grass prairie, right? So over the history, those soils evolved with animals, with large herds of animals, with bisons, the grass, the tall grass prairie, the soil, climate, and animals all co-evolved together. So it's natural to put livestock back to the soil, and you will see very promising result, very significant result of restoring the grasslands in a large area of Midwest of the United States. But in the Eastern United States, for example, here in the Northeast, we don't have those large herds of livestock animals in the history. The soils here evolved under the forests. So it makes more sense to put agroforestry here, and you will see more benefits here than putting animals here.
Well, I wonder, Yichao, well, I wonder because if I could, because I think this idea of mimicking nature can only really go so far. I mean, agriculture is not nature. Agriculture was derived to provide food for people. And I think that there are things about agricultural systems which are efficient because they are designed for agriculture, and they're not designed to be natural systems. Yeah. So I think necessarily going back to mimicking a system because there were livestock there on the prairies, I'm not sure actually whether that can always work in my mind.
Well, I think this is an idea for another seminar, another webinar on the question of working with nature. What does it mean and should it be done? Maybe we'll make a note of that, because I think that could be really interesting.
I want to make a point. Sorry, I want to make a point. Of course, we cannot convert all the agricultural lands to native lands. We cannot do that. We need to feed population. Sure. But if we are to improve the soil health or ecosystem services or environmental benefits, I think the direction is to mimic the native conditions of that certain locations.
Well, I think on that note, I think this argument will run and run. So I think we don't have time for it to run. So we've got 5 minutes until we have to close. So perhaps each of you could just say in just about a minute all the things that you wanted to say and haven't had a chance to say for now. And whoever wants to start.
Well, I can start. I just actually said that earlier. I think farmers, they know how to farm regeneratively. They are very creative. They just need support from us, from society, from consumers, from government policies to help them do their good job. And their job is not just producing food, but also protecting our environment and natural resources and keeping us healthy and the planet livable. So we need to recognize, value, and support our farmers. And we need to keep doing that and do a better job.
Thank you very much. That was very, very succinct.
Yeah, thanks very much, Yichao. From my side, I would like very much the anonymous attendee who's giving lots of useful comments to identify themselves. I think it would only be respectful to do so if you wouldn't mind. From my side, I guess what really gets me going is when people have got dogmatic approaches where they say, this is it, this works everywhere, and that is being claimed. And that really makes me very uneasy and very unhappy. And I think discussions like this are really important. And I thank Yichao very, very much for coming into the lion's den, if you like, with us and to discuss, because I really think it's important that we do air these things and look at opportunities for agreement and disagreement. I think we all commit very much to, looking for a better way of doing agriculture and all of the complexities and nuances there are. Regenerative agriculture is here to stay. Whether I think that's a good thing or not, there is so much investment in it now, companies putting billions into it, almost competing with each other to say, we're putting in 3 billion, we're putting in 3 billion, PepsiCo, Unilever, Nestle, you name it, everybody. It's very likely that this term will be around for a long while. And I think what we've got to try and do is to make sure that we hold people accountable that what they're doing is positive. And it's positive with a broader view on the world than just, if you like, their own narrow production chain, and takes into account some of these bigger issues about global food security, global conservation, ecological footprints, you name it. So I thank you very much for the opportunity for being part of this. And I really enjoyed the discussion. So thanks to Yichao particularly for me.
Well, thank you to both of you for a really, really great and thought-provoking conversation. Some of these big questions and topics about farmers that Yichao was mentioning and about the systems level, we want to kind of incorporate it you can find on the table website and also in the chat box. And finally, just to thank everybody around, all the participants, all the audience for attending. Please do keep in touch with what we're doing at Table, and you can do this in various ways. For a start, you can subscribe to our newsletter, Fodder, which provides a roundup of research, reports, events, jobs, etc., that are food system related. We have a podcast going with about six episodes so far, something like that, it's called Feed. You can find it on our website, and its focus is on the theme of scale in the food system. And we'll move on to what should the future be, more global or more local, and we will move on to subsequent themes in due course. And I think that's about it from me for now. Just wanted to say, and Helen has put more ways of staying in touch with Table in the chat box. It just remains for me to once again thank our speakers very much for spending time, and to everyone for attending this event, and to wish you all a good afternoon or evening or morning.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
And Yichao, I'm going to come and visit you at Rodale whenever I can. Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. Look forward to it.